Thank you for coming. Is it Friday today? Thank you for coming out on this Friday to listen to some poetry. It's so exciting to be reading with Quintin again and to be here in Boston. So I'm going to read a couple of poems from my book, which was published in October. And then I'll read a few fresh poems that I've written. I've been living in Provincetown for about 5 months at the Fine Arts Work Center as a fellow, which is a pretty weird place to spend the winter. If you've ever been there, maybe you can imagine. And I'm going to start with what I think is a funny poem, and then kind of, jump around a little bit. Every day I get exciting emails. Every day I get exciting emails. I receive an interesting email every day. Every day I got an interesting email. I got an interesting email every day. There is a nice email daily. Every day has a good email. Every day you have a good email. You have good emails every day. You have good emails daily. You are good for us every day. You are good for us every day. You're fine every day. Hi everyone every day. Hello everyone every day. Hello every day. Hello every day. Hello every day. Thanks every day. Thank you each day. Daily. Every day. Every day. The day. The day. 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 A day. The sun. 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 The sun. Day. 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 Guess it's not really a laugh out loud, but it's fun for me to read. So
it is funny.
Thanks. It's gonna get less funny from here. All right. This is a semi-related poem topically, but I guess they're next to each other in the book, so I guess, they are related in that sense. They're neighbors. Considering the unit of the day. Found myself unable to retrieve my laundry from the basement, oscillated between poles of self-beratement and forgiveness. The words appear in any order and I read them. Why I am my wasting life. Viewed a lot of pictures of humans of late capitalism. Viewed a trove of products. Added to my cart a single pink stain. Considered the optimal time to cancel Prime. Concluded the time wasn't now. Considered curtailing my presence. Gathered evidence by examining my presence. Scrolled until I felt my body rise in temperature. Tried to get a racist fired, but was unable. Returned to reading The Idiot. Continued reading The Idiot, though my laundry was occupying public space. Texted "Where are you?" to anyone. Wished I had a life where I read, but I am reading. Recalled the mannequin's nipples protruding up out the bra. Decided to masturbate, but mandated a waiting period, noting I had been reading about various cases of rape. Began masturbating, but thought what she'd said about the flowers, that they were beautiful despite being dry. Was our love also dry? And was it also still beautiful? Ceased masturbating to consider. Applied to a job in Kurdistan. Considered whether I wanted the job or wanted to want it. considered the difference between these, its shape, its dimension, texture, searched for images of reverse sandwiches throughout duration of this consideration. Read about Avicii's last days, read about the Golden State Killer's identity, considered the ethics of using ancestry data to identify criminals, concluded I needed more time for opinion formation. Listened to my most listened to songs of the past year compiled by an algorithm, considered how others' outfits altered my opinion of them, considered what I could supplement my regular masturbation routine with, rejected all options. Developed a desire for books to include images of each character, immediately on wish list. Masturbated with the non-routine hand. Began to sweat and considered this a positive supplement to pleasure. Recalled the time I masturbated wildly in my first adult apartment, its new wood floors and me on them at last free of my roommates. I incorporated this picture as evidence of my desirability. Back then, I still believed everything was adding up to something. Placed the leather choker doubled on itself between my teeth, writhed around my prized pile carpet until I started crying docile tears. Imagined myself as a cartoon and crying sharp white diamonds. Filed this image away to the database of my self-concept. Considered my dead grandmother to whom the carpet once belonged. Considered my child self propped up on elbows upon this very carpet. Considered the story my grandma told of a Muhammad sent to steal this carpet from her. Felt a slick of sweat arise beneath each breast, but left my heavy sweatshirt on. Considered the role of memory and agony in pleasure. Told myself I deserved to be in hot discomfort. Asked myself why I was crying. Well, I was missing someone. I was missing myself too. Okay, I'll read the first poem in this book. So, I wrote most of these poems, some of them when I was in graduate school, and some of them after I moved to Kurdistan, which is where my father grew up. So they're very inflected by this time. Yeah, both considering moving to Kurdistan and what that would mean, and then also later living there. And the opening poem of the book is an airplane poem that I wrote while I was moving there. So, Iraq badge panic. You could say it wrong, like my racked brain, or with the wrong G, like gag or garament. Some words are nearly in runes. Yesterday, the gynecologist told me I spell my name wrong. Should have an O between the F and U. Am I trying to get pregnant? In my country, he begins, and then between my parted legs tells me that over there they do everything that we do, just behind closed doors. Am I anxious? Well, someone is tweeting at me from a burner account, or my step-grandma's trying to troll me again. But I've already gone quick violet. On the plane beside me is a healer who tells me about her interest in belly dancing. Belly good is what my grandpa says instead of very. Not his accent, just his joke. We approach the Fertile Crescent. Howler, Kirkuk, Baghdad, 3 neon shocks. Across the aisle, a woman opens up a document that just says art, then selects the text in baby blue and makes it shrink. Timing, says the healer. such a powerful force in life. Oh, every time I read that poem, the last line about timing means something different to me. It's kind of strange. Sometimes your own, do you have this feeling like your own poems come back to haunt you in ways that you couldn't have predicted? Okay, just going through it in real time right now. All right, I'll read the shortest poem in my book. www.curdchat.com. Beauty has joined this room. Beauty. Hello? Beauty has left this room. All right, I'll read one more poem from the book, which is the love poem. Everyone loves the love poem, right? I think, yeah. And this book, this poem, the context is that the word orange was the last color word to enter the English language, and for a long time this color wasn't referred to in literature except as yellow red, and it wasn't until the fruit actually entered like the English speaking world that the color became a word, which is kind of wild to think about. The title of the poem is A Color Named After a Fruit. Before oranges were sweet, they were bitter. The whole world was bitterer then. Nights unlit, wheat wild, each element bound in its own rind. And then you were there, in the rift cut out of mountain, your mouth with its triangle window. In the garden, the branches were dropping their blossoms, then bending with citrus, laden with sun weight. We could sit and watch the fruit go orange, the hue that moved through 5 tongues to get to ours. Let the moon go ochre, your milky teeth soft in my bared silk. A hummed line, the thrum of the primary colors, beneath the pith, the pulp. I think, yeah, that's all I'll read, and then I'll read 3 new poems. As sometimes happens, well, it was hard to write after my book came out. It was suddenly such a public-facing thing after something that had been kind of private forever and ever. It was a big shift for me, and it was hard to write. But I've started writing a little bit, or I thought I wasn't writing, but then suddenly I realized I had secretly been writing some poems, and they're kind of, it happened very unexpectedly, but I think they're kind of coalescing into a new book or project. Maybe it's not a book. It's just a project, which I'm calling Portal. So these poems are from that project. Yeah, Provincetown poems. We need to think about things a little more radically. For months, I felt I'm not myself, but myself's assistant, toiling on myself's behalf, half here, half nowhere, as I soldier on through emails to myself's relatives and contacts. I write my grandfather to say I peeled and cubed the quinces from the tree in his new wife's ex-husband's home among the redwoods, where he moved at 92 because he was too old to live in Kurdistan in these times. The quince was green and white and looked like a pear, but it wasn't. I emailed to say yes, no, and thank you. To say I read the book in the bath and liked it. We'll write back soon, I say to Lenny, who is pregnant. I write to say I'm sorry I was late to the meeting. I know it's frustrating when you've planned your day around it, have planned your life around the life of meetings, are living a life of obligations. I do not mind all obligations. I like to be bound. Though as a rule, I'm bad at follow through, bad at saying what I say I'll do, bad at doing what I say I'll do. I say I'll stretch. I say I'll write down my dreams. I say I'll stop melting my mind at either edge of sleep with a scream. I need a self-police, but not police. I need the opposite of police, not someone who grinds me out of my body, into the margins, into oblivion. I already grind myself away daily. I scrape the meat of my attention against the grater and tatter, disappear into ether, into the nether of the internet. The internet thinks I want to have a baby, and I do. I'm trying to have a baby, and the internet knows because I ordered a bulk pack of sticks that I dip into pee to see what is happening in me, and the internet knows everything. We built it like that with a godlike omniscience, a panopticon in which we split to be both watched and watcher. The first time I saw the O missing from God, I was 10 and rendered speechless. I had recently received my first failing grade on a test of the 10 Commandments. I was raised by skeptics to be skeptic, but believed in believing. I believed in circles, in the potency of future, in holes between places and times. I know nothing holy and will not. I didn't know where I came from, but I knew I would know its pitch and tenor when I heard it, and I hear it. What should I say? There is a part of me that isn't me. What I thought was rain on my roof was the kettle warming. What I thought was a pile of rocks on the far spit of sand was a young whale, strangled in nets and washed up. What I thought was morning was 20 minutes past noon. The tide was rising, and I was late to my meeting with no one. The humpback whale was gray and white where its skin had come off, which it had, revealing what looked like a sort of foam. I wished to believe the whale was a prop on a set about human catastrophe, but it wasn't. Or this was the set, and we were all living in it. I refuse to censor all the violence built into the language I've inherited. Soldier, police. It's important that we see it. The body of the whale will take a long time to decay. The stench of flesh was very strong. The hard white flesh of quince turned ruby as I boiled it down with sugar into jam. When the self finally appears, don't turn yourself away.
Nice.
I like having someone in the audience like you.
As in dreadful, also.
Sky Barbara. This is kind of a love poem too. The year we wed, you are always taking off your mask as we exit buildings, leaving a line on each of your cheeks that I want to touch before they fade. After we wed, we flew back to the country of my birth and drove across it, staying along the way in homes of friends and relatives of mine, none of whom had met you, and no home that we stayed in was similar in any way to the last, except for the brand of hand soap, which everyone across 12 states had purchased in scents like radish, lavender, rain. You know, that kind of hand soap that everyone has. I want to stress that everything was changing. My old friends' fortunes were diverging, and the differences were jarring, like we were on a tour of ways to live, no version of which appealed. My throat was sore for the trip's duration from too much talking, explaining in each state how we had met, a narrative which grew bulky under its own weight by the time we reached Cape Cod, where at dusk I mistook a traffic light for the moon and gasped before I realized my error. Once I thought destiny a sort of room that you entered, but sometimes my life really feels like my life. When I settle into bed to read at 9:30, cramping where I think an embryo is embedding into me, I turn off the light only to see I can't read without the light, and so I turn the lamp back on, making its shade rattle and laughing, though I'm alone, and I know you are coming. All fall, bots scoured the web, compiling posts and tweets remarking on the poet's passing, posting them on sites with URLs like newdeath.com, deaddeath.com, and Daily Web Point. It's true I hardly knew her, but still her absence haunts me. The death that took April away indeed is crude, the auto-generated text reads. All winter, I thought of my friends' friends who named their baby Sky Barbara. There's a smell in my life I can't get rid of. I cut my hair off to my shoulders, and without all the weight of itself, it's curly. I generate faces of people that don't yet exist and find that I already love them. I seek out a viral video of a woman giving birth in the front seat of a car, screaming in pain and then relief when the baby she pulls from her body begins to cry. The day we wed, Danish strangers called to us from passing bikes outside the courthouse, but we couldn't be sure of what it is, they said. Okay, I'll end with one more Cape Cod poem. Thank you again, and thank you, Quintin, for inviting me to read with you. It's such an honor and pleasure. I'm pregnant, if it wasn't clear from the last poem. So that's also crazy. It's much less spiritual and more bodily than I expected. That's been in my poems, as well as all the whales. Herring Cove. There are no herring here anymore. But winters at sunset, rows of older locals line the lot in silver vehicles, parked to face the setting sun across the ocean, I among them in my old gray Volvo. From our driver's seats we train our binocs on the waves, hoping to see the right whales which migrate through here this time of year. Some days, shimmering land masses appear on the far edge, or the silhouette of a turbine turning. Last week I combed this beach for trash with other volunteers, picking up between smushed butts and pearly tampons, toothed where they extruded their compacted cotton plugs. Made from plastic. Something big is out there. A woman calls out her open car, pointing at the sea. And I could see its breathing. White puffs of its exhale swept across the blurry blue in the shaky view of my glass magnifiers, pulling me through space. Something small is in me, growing with extraordinary speed, doubling every other week in size. Soon, I'm told, I'll feel its kicks against me like a fish inside a fishbowl. When the last slip of sun dips under, the show is over, and a long parade of exhaust exits the lot. My left breast hurts, and I'm hungry, oversalted, my sweet other far from me, and finally infirm with the virus we avoided for 2 years. It was the virus which slunk across borders, which made us move in together 2 years ago, into his dusty flat in Empire World, a gated compound in the land my father's people come from, where the sun flooded the windows each evening and water was nowhere. Now something half me, half him is testing its muscles against mine in its own waters. Amid the darkening waves, a single tail appears, then slips beneath the surface. Out there, something is arriving, something disappearing. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you, Tracy, for the wonderful reading. And thank you to Booksmith. This is like my neighborhood bookstore, so this was like, hey, I moved here and I was like, I've got to read there someday when I have books. And I have books, so I'm going to read here. So in that spirit, I'm going to read some poems that are kind of based on home. I'm originally from the Chicago area, and I've been living in Boston for now 5 years, 4 years in Brookline specifically. And so I'm going to read 2 from my first book, The Dandelion Speaks of Survival, and the rest will be from my more recent book, Claim Takes for Stolen People. The crazy thing about them is I put them out within 9 months of each other, and I was not expecting that to happen. So yeah, let's get into it. So this first poem is actually called Why I Just Say I'm From Chicago. This crazy thing about being from the Chicago suburbs is everyone says, like, what neighborhood in Chicago are you from? It's like, I'm not from the city, so trying to explain that to people, but also being very proud of being from the Chicago area. So yeah, first poem is Why I Just Say I'm From Chicago. Ask me where I'm from, and I'll tell you metro trains ripple through detached home corridors into downtown Chicago. That fistful of potholes, soiled napkins, taxi cabs, the bucket boy who beats a pulse. A peripheral whisper. That's where. I'm from the edge where deer herds dip into protected forest. It sounds beautiful until the first time the city claps fireworks into your chest, riddles you with rock, rap, jazz, blues every summer. You too would hop a train, ache like a pack of teens hoping to quench their bodies in Lake Michigan. The city shakes every bone more than spring tornadoes swivel the suburbs. That same wind scooped a 2x4 off a skyscraper, still skeleton naked in the loop. That board slapped the window to shards, glass glitter rained down. Caught sunlight, cast glimmer, brighter than any star that winks along past death in the suburbs. And so now that I've gotten to Chicago, this next poem is called This Is Where You Belong, and it's an ode to my actual hometown, Country Club Hills, Illinois, which is 25 miles southwest of the city. Where the Sears Tower casts a shadow across the land, this is 25 miles southwest of Chicago, a wheat field cleared for a billboard that announces an outlet mall that never broke ground. And this is the Z9J Sakuda Elementary School playground where kids broke skin against mulch. Splinters swam in blood, boys kissed girls, lips wetted with dares. And this is Atkin Park, where sock-swaddled padlock swung an eviction notice to an eye, blood-speckled hopscotch squares. And this is Chris's backyard, where concrete chipped knuckles, where boys chased the jump ball, shared sweat, put up shots for games of 21, wobbled defenders. And this is the creek ditch where victims emptied pockets of a few bills, Pokemon cards, and fruities. Big Mo pedaled away on someone's mongoose. He always said he was coming back. And this is Costner Avenue where kids flew downhill on that same bike, arms extended, wind coasted over palms. And this is another U-Haul truck going. And this is another U-Haul truck coming. And this is another U-Haul truck with a belly full of furniture, engine idled for arrival or departure. And this is a for sale sign. And this is a for rent sign. And this is a for rent sign. And this is the street light on 180th outside St. Emmerich, where Keith's mom whooped him in front of all of his friends because sunset then stars beat him to his doorstep. And this is a Cutlass Supreme with 24-inch rims that ripple bass down Ravislow Terrace up Idlewild Drive. And this is Country Pantry. That's the AMC Lowe's. That's the Walmart where teens posted up in the parking lot, loitered around their mother's sedans, revved their hips to summer hits. This is Country Club Hills, where I-57 and I-80 laced like fingers interlocked over the city. The American flag, 250 pounds of polyester, flaps over the land. So I love that flag. I mean, I don't really love the flag, but I love that the city tried so hard to put itself on the map that they got a 250-pound gigantic American flag once upon a time. It's not there anymore. Last time I went home, it was smaller, and I was very disappointed. So now these are poems from Claim Tickets for Stolen People. This book is actually new as of February. I actually started writing this while I was still submitting the first book out, and it was one of those things where I was like, I don't know if I want to send this out yet because I still want to work on it more. My friend said, like, well, the world is ending, so you might as well just, like, chuck it out there because you might not have time. So the first poem I'm going to read from this is called When I Grew Homesick for Boston Instead of Chicago. The Dan Ryan South Side start just before 87th Street, a throat where cars fly in from I-57 and I-94, clutter like Garrett's popcorn kernels. That commuter cluster, unlike the levered connector stop and go jockey for position, the Pike syrup drip next to Storrow Drive. Even still, I arrive at contentment. I no longer search for a Wicker Park gate in an Alston rat. Chicagoland's plump boulevards can't compare to how Boston streets straddle cars in one way so narrow you won't breathe. This compact metropolis, Brookline in the crook of Boston's arm, unlike how Evanston latches onto Chicago, makes a home in me like a rafter of turkeys that roost near the sea line on Beacon Street. I settle to the point that I do not mistake a creak in my bones for a brown line as it corners in the loop. I do not abandon memories of Chicago's summertime, carnivals that illuminate Marshfield Plaza spill neon onto I-57. Chicago won't let me forget. My cheeks wind-scored whenever I return home, a vortex shoved in my nostrils to steal my words before I can speak ill of the cold. And what does Boston give me? Autumn in Commonwealth Avenue in Brighton. At the top of the hill, I see a firelit tree border around the city. Nature's caution of old life's proximity, the once was always burning just within reach.
Beautiful.
So yeah, I didn't really like Boston when I first got here.
It's nice.
When we drove from Illinois, the 15 hours, we were 10 minutes outside the city, and I was like, so where's the city? I was like, we're still in the forest, where's the city? That took me some time. I still hate the streets here. I'm gonna live here permanently, but I still hate the streets here. So this is actually an ode to the expressways in Chicago. I-57 is the expressway that I would take from my hometown into the city. The Dan Ryan is the connecting expressway, like once you're actually in the city to get into downtown. And it's kind of terrible. It's fun. It's like 10 lanes of like chaos, but it's kind of terrible at the same time. But I love it. So this is I-57 to the Dan Ryan Improv. I-57 to the Dan Ryan grooved surface fills heads with nods, thumps car wheels at pavement, lips jackhammers right on in gravel grit gospel at 159th. Backhoe arm waves to God, but don't it be hell that bakes this summer. Bends these lanes, serpentine, bedevils, rush hour congregations, nah. On 127th, it be jazz exhaust. Sputter trumpets that get down round traffic cones that bump, clink, beat when treads trespass your ETA. Hey now, hide this vest in flashing lights at 115th. That thunk, a thunk, a thunk, a thunk. Snowbrush bump in the trunk, gravel jump all night under floodlight. Ain't no broken axle, nah. At 95th, that be car slapping drums, that boom to boom, that boom boom doom boom. But don't they lay it down asphalt smooth before that crossfade into winter? Chill, tires skirt, Sutton stops, cha-cha slide on ice, snowplow hold down, slow down, slippery conditions, rock salt, chatter, pothole, percussion. Now for something Boston. So this is delayed MBTA train homeless Jimi Hendrix Stratocaster. We know the T. We've been on the T. So yeah. Third rail hums electric, a rumble in the concrete throat. Train a stop away, delayed for 11 minutes. Makes me want to get up and scream, tired feet and all, sleep heavy head nods after crosstown traffic navigations of Park Street. After long work day. The next train to shoes off, clothes off, mind off is now approaching. Train cars groan around the bend and rasp while Jimmy's purple haze riffs in my headphones. 10 red striped cars thunder the platform, steel glass blur slingshot along the rails. A screech rips the station as the train slows to a halt. In my ear canal, metal on metal grind as Jimmy engraves his initials. So this next poem is called Bridge Strike on Storrow Drive. I was asked to write a poem about physical touch post-pandemic and how we're kind of missing out on that. And it happened to be in September. So I was like, oh, hey, like that's kind of cool. All these like moving trucks hitting, bridges. So they luckily took it too, because I was like, this is going to be a stretch. But this is my ode to all the U-Hauls into the bridges on Storrow. Metal touching metal, gnarl me into wreckage, shear my scalp from my skull as we collide, my sides bulge then break, all my cargo scatters beneath this bridge so sudden, my produce crates, bed that slept in many apartments, now debris on Storrow Drive. This overpass, why do I always bring the fire to your I-beams? Smoke and oil, lights and sirens, congestion in car horns. I don't interrupt traffic flow just to mar your paint. I like your graffiti more than clearance signs. You hover over space where rain stops for a moment. Your shadow could embrace my side view mirrors. Look, you are the bridge. I am a truck, foot to some floor, still heaving as a heavy thing does. I race to crash. These many Septembers when my metal met your metal. Guts and gears swept to the shoulder, not the collision or clash. It's my hoping each time, if even for seconds, that I'll coast under your steel, that you will be my shelter. So this poem is called The Freedom Trail tour guide shyly mentioned slaves were sold at Boston Harbor. What brick would guide us across the Atlantic? Ocean floor sand, this grain was once bone, once body. Crispus Attucks would receive his own branch on the trail from state and Congress to Framingham, to the harbor, to waters charted from the Ivory Coast to the Americas. Whose tax dollars would pay for the masonry, lawmakers ask. Lawmakers allege some history isn't worth it to save. Ask Faneuil Hall, the busker who beats buckets, pots, and pans. First put a few bills in his hat. He'll explain where to find lineage. Check between the stone. not the red, white, and blue bricks from the Common to Bunker Hill. Time flays these streets to their cobbles. No family history will sprout if you place a seed in the pothole. You won't heal the wound. Some tourists comment how nice it is that they can see remains of the past on the USS Constitution. They hop on and hop off a trolley, stop at a bar, celebrate the liberties of their bodies in waves of Sam Adams until the last dregs trail down their throats. And so this second to last poem is one that's very Brookline related. It's called Would Be Rats. It was sparked by this viral tweet that was like, squirrels would like be rats if they were only out at night. So like I got a good chuckle out of that, and I was like, no, that's inspiration. Use that. So this is called Would Be Rats. Brookline dawn, squirrels note the hour on Pleasant Street. Squirrels up and down tree trunks, in and out of trash cans near Com Ave. Squirrels, a viral tweet says, would be rats if they came out only at night. Bushy tail gangs loiter, a half-eaten apple in a squirrel's jaws. Two squirrels zig and zag, another squirrel stops and plots the next move. I stop and stare. A BPD squad throws spotlight into the morning. What dark do they hope to chase from the street? Squirrels know the hour. Though the dark eases from the trees, daybreak hasn't crested the apartments. The cops follow me with the light. If I roam this neighborhood, multi-million-dollar homes line these streets. At night, what would they call me? They turn their attention to the road. A squirrel bounds to a trash can for scraps. The squirrel emerges, a banana peel in its teeth. In my teeth, I clutch what names daylight affords me. And this final poem is a fun one, because I think it's fun. If I can find it, because my little note moved. So this poem is called Exegesis on a Chicken Wing. I've written now 3 chicken wing poems, and I'm kind of mad because there's one in this book, and I was like, why couldn't I get these together in the same book? But there are 2 in this book, so like, if you want to read the trilogy, you gotta buy both books. Just putting that out there. But yeah, this one's called Exegesis on a Chicken Wing. Pull apart the flesh between drumette, wingette, rip and tear the meat with your teeth and fingers, cheeks greasy, if you eat a chicken wing the right way. From end to end, a linear timeline of fat, gristle skin as you stretch the wing straight. The span from the axe to the chicken's neck. We expect no blood in the pan of 50 wings from sharks. No reminder of sacrifice as an exercise of hands. Hunger is an exercise of protest. We quell commotion in our bellies with mild sauce doused wings. With curved acrylics, my aunt excavates a vein, hooked in her teeth, sucks her canines to loosen carnage. I eat chicken wings in my campus student center to consume familiar bones in public. Don't you dare leave all that meat on that bone. Suck the marrow, gnaw the gristle to pay respects to those who pluck feathers, cleave breast from wings. It's Ramadan. At 3 a.m. my roommate fries wings to satisfy day-long hunger. We grab a bowl of bones, grab a fistful. It's a register of ancestors hunched, elbows bent at 90 degrees, fingers pincered around a chicken wing. Another bone clinks a plate. I unhinge connective tissue. Chicken bones scatter in a Walmart parking lot, on the sidewalk at Ashland and Clybourne. In Boston Common, another graveyard of hunger. If I gather these remains, I can chart a path home. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna do a Q&A. This is the part where you ask us questions.
can I first just say congrats?
Can I say congrats to you?
Yeah, sure.
It's very exciting that you have 2 books out in a year.
Oh, thank you so much. And
It's really exciting.
been an honor. We read together like what, in November?
Feels like a long time ago.
Yeah, and so I just feel so like privileged that the person I had just met was like, yeah, I'll totally read with you again, because that's a very big ask.
I was honored. I'm happy to be back with you. It's just a nice feeling also to like come back around. So and see your second book come out.
I would love to hear a little bit about your process for writing, like where you draw inspiration from, and maybe this is how you know when you're done with the poem. Curious.
I wish I had a great writing practice where I sat down at a regular time and wrote. My process is more like I'll be in my car in a parking lot and then take some notes on my phone's notes section and then find them like 3 months later and like, oh, this is a poem, and then combine them with some other notes in my notebook, and then I don't know what happens, but sometimes that coalesces, and it's really hard to know when a poem is done. I mean, I always try to read some new poems if I have the opportunity, because reading in front of an audience, sometimes you can really tell what lines are not done, and I find that really informative. So it's always like feels vulnerable to read work that's still kind of fresh and malleable, but I don't know. I don't think that poems are necessarily done. I have this one poem in here that I've edited, and I just read from my edited version where I've like crossed out 2 lines. And so for me that poem, like, yeah, it wasn't done in this printed version even, but it feels like publishing is just like a snapshot of something, but maybe I'm just a weird poet. I don't know. What's your process like?
Oh man, so it's been interesting since the pandemic started. So grad school was great because I was in a low-res MFA program. I was working full-time while in grad school. And I essentially was forced to find time to write every day. So toward the end of my time in the program, I discovered like this Cafe Nero down in downtown Crossing, and I was like, okay, this like it's a commercialized coffee shop, but it feels homey. And I would just leave for work 2 hours early every morning and just go there and write. And I told myself, I was like, I have to write something, whether it's a poem or working on my like essays, or I have to read something. I have to be doing something that's going to push me into that. And so that got me. This first book was actually my creative thesis for grad school. My second book was kind of the same process where I was in the habit of going to a coffee shop and writing, and so I would just go before work. At this point, I had started my job actually at the MFA program where I got my master's. And I would just go and sit and write every morning. I'd be at the Starbucks at the Star Market in Chestnut Hill, and just like, all right, I'm gonna go to campus, but first I'm gonna sit and write. And all that was great, and it worked. But then I became a dad, and after becoming a dad, that was actually pretty easy. That was the
I
easy
didn't know
part.
that you were a dad.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
2.5-year-old. The thing is, like with like babies, they don't really require as much as like you may think in certain ways. So
That's what I'm hoping.
you're gonna spend a lot of time to yourself. Weirdly enough, you're gonna spend a lot of time to yourself with the baby sleeping, and like if you can't sleep, you do things. So like I spent a lot of time writing the second book, and my daughter was just like sleeping, and I wasn't doing anything. But then the pandemic happened, and my routine for getting to leave the house and having a place to write outside the house completely disappeared. And so I would say I count myself lucky that the first book got accepted, and then the second book was essentially at a point where I can work on it whenever I needed to. By the time that happened, because I had no process anymore. I wasn't leaving the house. I couldn't carve out time. I was like, I don't have anywhere to go, so I'm not getting up like at 5 a.m. for any reason whatsoever. And I just haven't really gotten that back. And so I've been working on some poems toward a third book, and it's been a very haphazard process. I wrote about 40 of the poems that are currently in the stack of like look at them later during National Poetry Month, doing like the 30-30 challenge last year, because I was just like, why not? But like otherwise, it's like I might have an idea one day because I went to a reading and heard something that inspired me, but like it's I just don't have a process anymore. And I think that getting back out into the world will probably kind of build that back in. But for me, it's like I need everything to be part of the ecosystem for it to work out. I can't just like sit down and say like, okay, like I'm gonna make time to write because I need to. Sometimes it is just inspiration. Like I will remember fondly these times where I come home from work and my wife was like, oh hey, how was your day? And I'm just like, I'm sorry, I know I love you, but I have to go sit down and write this poem before I lose it. Sometimes that happens, but I would say it's a little bit harder now. I think so much has changed in the world that it's hard to like have that kind of like focus. But I hope to get back to it. But in any case, I think it's a weird thing for me to try to say like there will always be a process, because I've already shown myself like I can get like shaken out of that relatively easy. I guess if you would say like a pandemic is easy in some ways. But yeah, it doesn't take much to be like, yeah, I can't do this anymore. Like 5 a.m. like to go nowhere, to sit in like sweatpants and put on a like business shirt for the meeting, like no.
Yeah, I used to do a lot of writing in cafes, and when I was in the MFA, I was living in Brooklyn, like going to school in Newark, so that was like 3 hours of transit, and I love writing on trains, planes, subways, and my process also is just really, it's amazing to hear you also say this, like 2 hours at a cafe. That's like my ideal, and it feels so distant at this point.
I miss it. I think that, when I enjoy this, like again, thank you all so much for coming out, because like I mean, like virtual events are so cool, but like I find myself like washing the dishes while I'm listening, which I mean I'm still paying attention, but like I miss like the whole like, hey, you have a space where like because you're out of the house and like your obligations in the house are not there, you can just sit and kind of be in the moment with the writing. So it definitely feels good to be back in that space. Taking the tea again, getting to read books on the train is cool. That's like nice. I didn't get to do that for a while. Having some time where it's just like, all right, I'm trying not to focus on like the weird things going on around me on the train. So like I have a book and like it forces me to sit and like focus. So yeah.
Other questions?
Yes.
You mentioned getting a flash of inspiration when you hear someone else read. How does that process work? How does the process work of turning someone else's of hearing someone else and getting inspired from that, but making sure it's still in your own voice when you get home and act on that inspiration?
That's a good question, because there's been a lot of controversy around like after poems lately. Well, there's some blatant plagiarism too, but after poems have been a big talking point, because there is for some people like an unclear line of like where an after poem is an after poem and like where it's plagiarism, which I think it's pretty clear. For me, I think one of the biggest things I learned in my grad school experience, and like I don't think grad school is like big for everybody, but like for people who need it, it can be very formative. And for me, it was figuring out how to write poems that were like my poems. So one of the best pieces of advice I got from our mentors, and it was particularly while working on a lot of the poems that ended up in this, was like, okay, you say this is a car, but what kind of car is it? That's a tree, what kind of tree is it? What street is this? These are all things that kind of prompted me to think like, okay, I have to write poems in ways that only I can describe things. So with the one poem about me being homesick for Boston, I was like, okay, so like, what are some similes and metaphors that only I would use as a person who lived in both places? And like, these are kind of the ways that like, like you risk to some extent, alienating those readers who aren't going to be like encouraged to pick up and find places or feel the sense that this is a real place because it's named. But at the same time, then like you get to engage with people like, yeah, like I've seen the turkeys like on Beacon Street with the ceiling. Craziest thing moving here was seeing turkeys in real life. Blew my mind the first time. But yeah, that's the kind of stuff that kind of helps me at least with inspiration. Is I have to say, like, even if it's the same topic, like this entire second book was based on Reading the Moon is Trans by Joshua Jennifer Espinosa, and it was just meditation on like, okay, why does this poem need to exist? And I was like, okay, well now that I've kind of had thought about that, can I do that for a whole book? And that was the way I kind of stepped away from like what the original is, because sometimes it's just like a little kernel, and it might even just be a word. I don't know if you ever had that experience, like you hear a word and it's like, all right, I'm writing a whole poem around that.
Yeah, I have. um, it's an interesting question. I teach poetry, and I feel like teaching poetry has given me a whole different dimension of love for poetry. But I often assign my students to do like direct imitation poems. I think it's great. I mean, I think it's the way that a lot of us think and write, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But what I would ask is like, should you try to publish that poem? Like maybe not. Like maybe that is for your process, and then maybe eventually it turns into something else. And then I think like acknowledging it. I agree. Like for me, I think it is pretty clear. Like you know it when you see it. And I have had that experience of looking at a student's work. I was like, this is amazing, and then they mention that it's after this other poem, and I realize it's like the same poem, and it's extremely disappointing. But I think it's a great exercise, and then sometimes it brings you some past the exercise. But yeah, I think we should all do more like imitation poems. Just keep them for yourselves, maybe.
I think we have time for one more question.
What makes you all want to write as opposed to doing anything else with the rest of your life?
Ooh, you want to start with that?
Yeah, so why am I always forget the names of like people and things like when I need them the most. So there's this quote that was like in my email signature, and so I had to start putting like book links in there. It was just like, in like your deepest hour at night, ask yourself if you must write, and if your answer is I must, then write. I was a psych major in undergrad, and it was just like a day where I had this really awesome professor who was just like, regularly, like, here's what you need to do to make money. And I was like, this all sounds terrible. Like, I don't want to sit in the lab all day just to justify the fact that I need to be paid. So I was like, what am I going to do next? Well, I picked a school that at the time was one of the few that had an undergraduate creative writing program, specifically because I wanted to double major. And then I ended up switching over to writing because when I went in to talk to the department head about like the curriculum, I was like, wait, this is homework? Like I get to do this for homework? Like this is the greatest thing ever. And so yeah, it's like it's that impulse where it's for me it's engaging my creative and my critical brain. Puzzles for me are like poems for me are like a puzzle in the sense of I'm trying to fit the right words in the right places, the right sounds in the right places. Other than writing though, like there's a thing that like I obsess over, like doing. It's like I love making things with Lego.
That's not what I was expecting you to say.
Oh no, yeah, I love my kid too, but like Lego, then I love my kid more than Lego. But it's like it's another way I've just kind of like learned to train my creative brain. I've been thinking forever I need to write like some craft essays around like using Lego in poetic form. I haven't got around to it yet. But yeah, it was like a thing that I got really into more during the pandemic. It was like, hey, I was a kid and now I'm an adult and like Lego's more expensive, but I want to have a hobby again. And it's nice because there's a community of people who also make things, and it's really interesting talking to them because like there's like craft behind these things. Like it's not just like, oh hey, like I put these blocks together because they fit. Like they talk about form when they make things, and I was just like, okay, like if I can't write poems, like I'm just gonna sit and do this. And if someone would pay me money to sit and do this all the time, I totally would. I was invited to Lego Masters 4 times. I had to turn them down because of work obligations, but if they like do that again and time works out and I can ultimately eventually get paid to do that, I will totally do that. I'll still do writing, but I will do that all day. That's me.
I can't top the Legos. I took a summer workshop in Provincetown about 5 years ago with the poet Robin Cossey Lewis, and she assigned this essay by Reginald Shepard. I think it's called Why I Write. And in the first couple of paragraphs, he says something like, I write because I'm offended by my own death, and I'm offended by the death of my mother, and it was one of the most powerful things I've read, and he kind of writes about just this wanting to save any scrap from the wreckage of just this, you know, most of what we live, most of our days, we just started to take it to this place, but, you know, they disappeared, so it's super ephemeral, and even just as a personal act to go back to a little scrap of a record of a day, even if it's only preserving it for me one more time to revisit it, I find that this super, it feels just kind of sacred and like enriching my own life, and I kind of always wrote, but I didn't start to take it seriously until my mid-20s when I started to think like, well, if I actually care about this, why don't I take it a little bit more seriously? But like there's that, but then the thing that's been so rewarding as I've started to publish work and put a book out is to be in touch with other writers, and that's kind of this other dimension of it too. But yeah, I'm offended by my own death. That's a great essay. I really recommend it. I assign it to all my students, you know, just to make things real from the beginning. But yeah, thank you. Those are all good questions. And thank you so much for having us here. It's just, it's a delight to read in person again.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much for reading with us tonight. Thank you everybody who's been here.